conduct in the office to abuse power, to obstruct justice. And one of the areas that the founders and the writers of our Constitution who put it in there were most concerned about is between elections, when someone's actually in office and you can't remove them because there's not an election scheduled for 1 to 3 more years, what do you do if that person in office is abusing the office, is, in specific words in the impeachment clause, engaging in bribery or treasonous acts? We need some kind of remedy, and that's why they put it in. And the American public will hear live witnesses and be able to make some judgments for themselves. And then, just as we did back in 1974, we'll expect members of Congress to vote. And one of the women featured in our book is Barbara Jordan, who, if you've never heard of her or don't remember anything about her, she delivered a speech during the Nixon impeachment that was one of the great speeches, the political speeches in our country, and certainly the last half of the 20th century. And she defends the Constitution. You can go to YouTube and see it. And it is so powerful thinking about it today because of the way that she presented her case. So this is high stakes, and in our system, impeachment's like indictment. It's like the charges being made. So if the House votes to impeach, then it goes to the Senate for a trial, and that's a much more difficult hurdle. What happened in the Nixon impeachment is a little bit instructive because the evidence was presented, and then articles of impeachment were based on the evidence for abuse of power, obstruction of justice, contempt of Congress, and then the House committee, consisting of both Democrats and Republicans, voted. And Republicans voted for one or more of the articles of impeachment. In the committee, it hadn't yet even gone to the full House, but that afternoon, after hearing the arguments and seeing Republicans vote on the basis of the evidence, Republican senators went to see Richard Nixon at the White House and said, "You should resign." And so he did. So I can't sit here and predict exactly what's going to happen. So we'll have to, see how it plays out.
I'd like to now turn the lens the other way, because I'm imagining sometimes you and others sit in the US and look at British politics and go, at least it's not us. And I know you're very fond of the UK, that you travel here frequently, that you've got Welsh roots. Of course, I was born in Wales, so complete transparency, I've started to tell people that we're related. I think I should confess that. But how are you seeing this moment in British politics?
Well, I think it's a symptom of some of the very real problems and disagreements that our democracies have. I mean, your country is about as divided as our country is, trying to figure out what to do with the results of a referendum that didn't provide as much guidance as needed to make the decision that the voters apparently voted for. So yeah, we want to leave. Okay, does that mean you want to leave the customs union plus the EU? Does that? How are we actually going to operationalize this? And I watched from a distance as Theresa May tried over and over again to come up with something that fulfilled the voters' preference, but actually could work, and could work in a way that didn't undermine and hurt the UK. So I think you're in kind of the same spot still, and at some point, maybe after this election finally, a decision can be made, and then see what the consequences are. Because I don't think anybody truly understands all of the consequences, but some of them that have been the real sticking points, for example, having to do with Northern Ireland, a place that I've been numerous times, and supported the Irish Peace Project that led to the Good Friday Agreement. Well, what does it mean? Depending upon how it's structured, it could very well ignite, people who are going to stand up and speak against the peace agreement, or speak against the promises that were made, and maybe even really tragically incite violence again. We don't know, but people need to be thinking about that. If you look at the British economy, growth is down. People are unsure about what comes forward. So certainty will help, but is it real certainty? I mean, these are all tough questions, and I don't think, they have easy answers at all. So one hope is that whatever the outcome of your election, there be at least the capacity to move forward, make certain decisions one way or the other. Because here's what I'm most worried about for both my country and yours, given our political deadlocks and divisions. We are missing out on a lot of great opportunities. There's no better countries positioned than the United States and the UK to own the future. Diversity is our friend, not our adversary. The freedom, the innovation, the whole concept of supporting great universities to do that research that will open new doors. We have a lot of work to do, and work that could be economically beneficial. Climate change is a perfect example. There's so much we could do to create jobs. Like right now in the United States, more people are employed in the solar power industry than in the coal industry, but the current administration wants to keep coal alive instead of saying, you know what, economically, that's not going to work. Let's switch to renewables. Let's really get on the fast track. China's saying we want to own the renewable future. So you can go down the list of what do we do about technology, artificial intelligence, all kinds of things. So at some point, I hope that, the UK can get back to, really showing the kind of creativity and envisioning a future that is going to be good for all the people here and will have, positive effects around the world.
One feature of the British election campaign so far has been the number of women who have said that they're not going to stand again. There have been 18 women who have indicated they won't stand, and whilst the statisticians would tell you that's not a disproportionate number, given the number of men who have also said that they're going to retire, what is startling is how early in their careers they are exiting. People who have got promising careers in front of them, you would think, but they're exiting now. And the fact that many of them are expressly pointing to the abuse online and the fact that it doesn't just stay online, that it actually becomes the threat of violence in their everyday lives. What's your reaction when you see that kind of impediment for women coming into politics now? I mean, we always talk about, role modelling, and you can't see it if you can't be it if you can't see it. What's that role modelling?
Well, this is one of the first things that I was told by friends of mine who are current or former women members of the House of Commons or the House of Lords, that there was a growing anxiety among women members about the threats that they face. And of course, with the memory of Jo Cox, who was murdered for her political standing. So I take it very seriously. And it is fueled by these online vile attacks that are out there. But it breaks into the real world. Just a few months ago, I was one of several people who was the target of a pipe bomb by a man who was clearly somewhat unbalanced, but also very committed to our current president, and was targeting what he thought of as the president's enemies, including me and Barack Obama and others. Thankfully, he wasn't a very effective bomb maker, but that's nothing to bank on. So I see political violence in general, the threats, the actions. I see an increase in hate crimes in our own country, accompanied by violence. And of course, we have a surfeit of weapons that people pick up and use. And so when I heard about all of these people, particularly the women who weren't going to run again or were not going to run in the first place, and they attributed it to the threats that they face, that is not only a threat to individuals, that's a threat to our democracies. If people are intimidated out of running for office in a democracy, because of these hate mongers on the left or the right, motivated by whatever, that's the path of authoritarianism. That's the path of fascism. When you are told you are in danger, or your family is. In fact, a number of these women have said that it's not just threats against themselves, it's threats against their children. So clearly something is amiss. We are not paying attention to what is motivating vulnerable people, extremists, ideologues, online and off. And I was at an event yesterday where the first woman commissioner of the London police was there, and she and I were talking about this. She said they take it very seriously, as they should, because unfortunately we've seen what happens when we don't provide the security needed for people in politics. But isn't it just tragic that we have to think about that now, and that women in particular are making a very rational decision to protect themselves and protect their families and not run for office?
And for the online component, I mean, what would you be saying to the social media companies about their need to step up to try and address the disproportionate nature of the vile material that is online and targeted at women in the public square? And you know about this from personal experience, I know about it from personal experience, but clearly it's a huge issue here in the United Kingdom.
Well, I referenced earlier this bill that was passed in Congress back in '96 to begin to sort of make sense of and regulate the internet. And a decision was made back then that channels for communicating information would not be held accountable for the information that was presented, because they were viewed as kind of passive providers. That's no longer the case, and we have a couple of pretty clear examples of what's happening in the U.S. that affect the entire world because of the location of a lot of these online companies. So, for example, Facebook has taken the position that it will not regulate political speech, which means that it will take money for and run advertisements that are blatantly false. And there is a particularly well-known one right now run by the Trump campaign against Joe Biden that is making demonstrably false accusations against Biden. So when that ad was presented to our TV networks, which are governed in a different way, they refused to run the ad. Twitter decided they wouldn't run the ad, and then they made a further decision not to run any political ads. And Facebook said, oh no, that's freedom of speech. People have to make up their own minds. It's a deeply irresponsible decision, and it is one that will make it increasingly difficult for people running for office to persuade voters to vote for them based on, accurate information as opposed to falsified information. There's another development that I think we will see more of in our upcoming election. Maybe it'll be in yours as well. And that's this new technology that is able to present what are called deep fakes, video deep fakes. So some months back, a group took Nancy Pelosi and took words out of her speeches over many, many different speeches, pieced them together to have her saying something she never said. But the words were still her words. So if somebody were to take everything Julie and I are saying up here and then they pieced it together so it had a totally different meaning, that's what they did to Nancy. And again, that was put online. Twitter took it down. YouTube took it down. Facebook kept it up. Why is that important? Well, at least in our country, slightly more than 50% of the American public gets its news from Facebook as its only source. Now, Facebook, it may be in your feed that there's an article from the New York Times or some other outlet that is directed to you, But there's also a lot of fake stuff that's directed to you, including a fake video of Nancy Pelosi. So technology is outpacing our ability to keep up with it, to understand what's real and what's not. And I think that this is not yet being addressed. It's not being addressed by our government, your government, or any institution, so that we try to have at least a somewhat level playing field for politics, for elections in our democracies. And in the absence of that, all bets are off. And it's going to be like the old Wild West. People are going to be targeting you because they've collected thousands of data points on you, and they're going to say, well, he's really vulnerable to any argument that has to do with animal welfare. So we need to claim that our opponent, has killed, dozens of dogs. And let's see if we can manufacture something out of what he has said in the past so that he says, I hate dogs, out of 3 different speeches. And we're going to target it to those people who are most concerned about animal welfare. That's where we're moving toward. And it is really dangerous. It's dangerous to democracy, and it needs to be addressed. But that's going to require not just individuals, it's going to require governments to do that.
We certainly do need to see big changes, but one of the things we've been trying to do here at the Policy Institute, at the Global Institute for Women's Leadership, in partnership with Ipsos Mori, the polling firm, and your team, is get to some underlying attitudes through a global poll about gender and politics and life and what it takes to succeed. And I want to take you now to a few of the results. The survey that we did globally, particularly in Britain, Australia and the US, revealed that people think men are less likely than women to need intelligence to get ahead in life, that women need intelligence more. I was just wondering, can you think of a time when a super smart woman perhaps lost out to a man who was less intelligent?
I would never say that intelligence is everything, but it is something.
The survey goes on. People were more than twice as likely to say that looks are a key factor in helping women get ahead compared to men. Do you think they've got that right, that unfortunately looks still do count?
Oh, 100%. And it's not just looks, because there's a lot of different looks that are perfectly, perfectly fine and appealing. It's certain looks, certain way to look. And the image that is expected of women, going back to the Japanese example, apparently includes not wearing glasses even if you're blind. You're going to run into walls at work, but you won't offend anybody by wearing your glasses, or high heels, for example. So it's these stereotypes about what a woman is expected to look like. I used to try lawsuits, many years ago, and I was mostly the only woman lawyer, and I saw a lot of different men in courtrooms, just as I've seen men in political life. And men are allowed to come in all shapes and sizes, all forms of dress, all kinds of presentation. But back in the day, so long ago, it's lost in the mists of memory, those of us who were in the professional world in the 70s and 80s, we had to figure out what our uniform was. And so we would wear skirt suits with white blouses and ribbons tied around our necks in bows. So that we were trying to figure out how to look professional. And there were many aspects of that effort during that time that, looking back on, you think, wow, but we didn't know. And I'll tell you just a little side story. So I remember there used to be an advice column in our local newspaper in those days by a man. I think his name was John Malloy, I think. Anyway, he would take advice to offer people in their work lives. And I will never forget reading a question that came in, and it said something like, I've just gotten a big promotion, so for the first time I'm going to have my own office, and I'm trying to figure out how to decorate it. Do you have any advice? Signed, like TJ. So the answer goes like this. Dear TJ, I can't tell from your initials whether you're a man or a woman, but my answer would depend upon which you are. Because if you're a man, you want to put, if you have a family, pictures of your family in your office, because people in your office will think you are a reliable fellow, that you are working for the betterment of your family. So put up pictures of your children, your wife, and others. If you are a woman, do not put pictures of your family in your office, because people will think you can't keep your mind on your work. That's the kind of stuff we were trying to make sense of back then. So thankfully, fast forward, there's a lot of difference now. People can, they have greater range of what they can wear and look and all the like. But I do think that there are still expectations. So when you say looks, it's kind of conventional attractiveness that people are talking about as they define it.
And do you think the men come in all shapes and sizes extends to men can have all sorts of hair and haircuts?
I think that's a really good observation.
Another aspect of our surveying where I think people have got this right, they said that they think personal connections are a bigger factor in getting ahead for men than women. Is the boys' network, is it still there, still in the way of women?
Oh, I think so. I mean, I think that's a kind of self-evident answer, because there still are many more readily available connections still for men. I think women are getting better about that, and we're certainly trying to do more to help young women, open doors for them, make references for them, etc. But I do think that the pre-existing work-related networks heavily favor men, and it still is true that oftentimes in a workplace, and I saw this and lived this, when the workday ends, especially if you have children, you need to get home. You have things to do. You have, babies to take care of, children to, feed, homework to supervise. And so whatever happens after the work hours that create bonds and networks, you're most likely, once you are a working mom, you're going to miss out on. And that's not the same. And I don't mean to pick on Japan, but it's such a ripe territory right now because of some of what's going on. So the current Prime Minister, Abe, actually came to see me after he was elected to talk about what he could do, because Japan's had a long period of stagnant growth. And they, like any other sensible country, is asking themselves, what can we do? Now, there are two immediate answers that would have sparked greater growth. He was well aware of them. One was more immigration in Japan, which apparently was a no-go. And the other was get more women in the workforce. So he was really interested in talking about how do we get more women in the workforce, because every country could actually increase their GDP if they knocked down barriers. Some countries could increase it by 40%. Some could increase it by 8%. Some of it has to do with not only ending laws and the like, but also, affordable quality child care and other support systems. So Abe really tried. I mean, he had a whole big agenda about it. But the way Japanese society is structured, women, once they marry, are responsible for their children and the elders in their family. And it is more than a full-time job. And men are expected to socialize after work. I mean, these are generalizations, but they're close enough. And that means going out to dinner, going out drinking, often not getting back till 10 o'clock at night, maybe seeing your family then, like on Sunday of the weekend. And so it's really clear that these networks are important. People want to know who they're working with. They want to know what kind of person you are. They'll love it if you play golf, if that's what they're interested in. So, yeah, the networks that do exist favor men for all the obvious reasons, and therefore there needs to be a more concerted effort to construct and nurture these networks for women.
And we're going to turn now to your book that is on display here, that you've written with Chelsea, the Book of Gutsy Women. But before we do, I think people would want to hear from you about how you've been a gutsy woman. Many of us, when we watch the election results come in, I was in Australia and I remember as the results come in very, very clearly, I'm sure most people in the audience remember where they were when the results of the election came in. How did you get over that? And here you are talking knowledgeably, frankly, about world affairs, still interested in ideas, still questing for change. I think people are in awe of where that energy and determination comes from. You know, what enables you to keep going, you know, day after day, cause after cause?
Well, I never saw it as primarily about myself. I saw, obviously, I was the candidate. I was trying to run and win an election, but it was about what we would do and how we would do it. I'm very motivated by that. I mean, I like to solve problems. I like to bring people together, to convene them, to think about how we best solve problems. That's what lights me up and gets me up and going. And so I never dreamed about being president when I was a little girl. I never thought I, you know, would or could be. And for me, it was, you know, the idea of building on the positive things and fixing the problems that we had inherited in our country. So, of course, I was devastated. It was such a shock. I mean, I can't even describe to you how it made no sense. And that's why I wrote a whole book called What Happened, because I was trying to figure out what happened. Because it was just not foreseen. There were things that went on that made no sense to me and others, unprecedented interventions, etc. So it was really difficult getting up that next day and going and delivering a concession speech. And I was particularly feeling the burden of having disappointed so many young women and little girls, because my campaign was filled with young women and particularly little girls, literally from like 4 to 12, who would come to see me and who, you know, would dress up like me or would say that they wanted to be president when they grew up. And so I knew there was all of this, you know, this new thinking that the campaign had brought about. So I addressed, you know, all the little girls out there, telling them not to give up on their dreams, whatever their dreams might be. But because I was trying to figure it out, I dove deeply into what was going on. You know, obviously mistakes that I made, misjudgments, that was all fair game. But trying to understand what else had happened, and, you know, the role of technology, the intervention by the Russians, which is not at all deniable. I mean, the conclusion that they conducted a sweeping, systematic attack on our elections can only be denied by people who literally refused to look at evidence. So there was a lot that was not just about that election, but about going forward, what were we going to do? So I feel like every day I get a chance to talk about some of these issues, work with other people. I started an organization to support young people running for office, people of color, particularly women out there running for office. I've helped a lot of candidates, a lot of causes, both in 2018 and then we recently had some elections in 2019. And as a former Secretary of State, it is especially troubling to me to see the role that the United States is both playing and refusing to play in the world right now, because I think it's made the world more unpredictable, less safe, and these are all matters that I don't think I should address just because I'm a former presidential candidate. I think, you know, people of concern, citizens in our country, your country, in democracies need to be addressing. So that motivates me and keeps me going.
Before we turn to your best story from Gutsy Women, I don't want to just explore that point about the dreams and aspirations of girls and how you felt that, because I've actually thought about this a lot. Even before I knew you personally, I watched your political career and felt invested in it. And, you know, there were times when I was barracking for you, there were times when I was crying for you because things hadn't gone well. And I hoped that you felt that support from women around the world. But I also sometimes think, are we still putting too much of a burden on your shoulders? I mean, it's a lot to carry the expectations. You know, you're a truly global figure, to carry the expectations of women around the world. How have you lived that duality, that, you know, sort of support that's there globally, but also I think the burden that can come with being the custodian of so many people's dreams?
That's a really profound question. You know, hardly a day when I'm out and around goes by without somebody saying something like that to me. For about 2 years, they would also burst into tears and sob on my shoulder. So I am very well aware that it wasn't just me and my election and then the failure of that effort. It was because people were seeing what I was doing on a very high stage under a bright spotlight as some kind of beacon or guide light to what they were doing or thinking about. You know, I had a woman here in London, you know, stop me and tell me that, you know, because of what she saw me doing, she made some very difficult decisions in her own life. So I know that I am out there, and people often both project onto me, making me better or worse than I actually am as a human being or a public figure, but I also know that they are internalizing a lot of it and trying to think through, you know, what can I do? And it's one of the reasons we actually wrote this book, because it's also very common when I'm out, and increasingly it even happens to my daughter, where young people, mostly young girls, will come up and say, you're my hero, who are your heroes? Or, you know, I've looked up to you, who do you look up to? And it's a conversation that Chelsea and I started when she was a little girl, because I wanted her to have a lot of role models. I wanted her to see women doing different things and the choices they had to make and the trade-offs and the sacrifices. So we decided to write this because I was well aware that there was a big letdown and a lot of disappointment. And I didn't want people to give up or be discouraged. I wanted them to, you know, be courageous and resilient and, in our word, gutsy. So by telling the stories, not my story so much, although there's part of that in there, but the stories of other women and young women, like Greta Thunberg or Malala, who kept persevering despite setbacks and attacks of all kinds, including physical. I wanted to have in one place, you know, about 100 stories where people could say, hey, I can relate to that, or I get that, or wow, I never thought about that. Because in this environment in which we live, this 24/7, you know, news, information overload, it's really hard to sort it all out and to make sense of it and to apply it to your own life. So this is our effort to, you know, kind of give people, you know, something to hang on to, some story that might have meaning to them.
And you're amongst friends in a very intimate audience. How good a co-author was Chelsea?
Well, let me say that it was mostly a joy. And it was, I think, harder on her than on me. We made lists of hundreds of women that we wanted to include, and some of the women on my list she'd never heard of, and some of the women on her list I'd never heard of. So we had to sort all that out. We wrote over 200 essays, and then our editor said, are you kidding me? You've got to cut that in half. So that was another hard process. But if Chelsea were sitting here, she would say the biggest challenge to her is that I write longhand. Now, the first event we did about the book, we could literally see younger people turning to others saying, what's longhand? And that's the way, you know, we used to write with, you know, quill pens. So I've just always, for long form writing, found it easier to provoke my thinking by writing longhand. And Chelsea just could not get over that. Now, she would also embarrass me tremendously by saying, yeah, she would write a page and then she would take a picture of it and send it to me. Well, yes, I did, because that's how we traded information. And then she would say, but I didn't think that would happen when we started editing. She said, you know, Google Docs are your friends, and track changes really work. Anyway, we got through it. But that did have, for some, you know, tense late-night conversations, I can't read what you've written. So, but, you know, it was by far a wonderful experience. And then we've been traveling around. We went all over the United States. We were here Sunday and Monday for events. And the best part of it was that she brought her newborn, Jasper, who's 3.5 months, because she's still nursing. So we got to travel with my grandson, and that was a special treat.
Fantastic. And I know that it's full of fantastic stories about gutsy women, but can you share one with us that's a particular favourite?
It's really hard. We categorized the women because we thought their stories sort of overlap, like you know, earth defenders, healers, activists, elected officials, and literally we could have had so many more people, and you know, we had to make some very hard decisions. You know, there's one woman who I always think about, because you know, when you wonder what you would do if faced with a really tough choice, one that put your life in danger or the lives of people you cared about, I think about this woman named Dr. Hawa Abdi, who is a Somalian. She is an OBGYN physician. She was born to a family of means in Somalia. She left the country to get her medical education, but she came home to practice medicine and to care for women and girls. And then Somalia was hit by a devastating drought, and then the explosion of violence, largely motivated by al-Shabaab and Islamist jihadist militia. So Dr. Abdi found herself on her family property taking in refugees, mostly women and children, who were being, you know, were fleeing their little farms, or their cattle had died from drought and they had nowhere to go, or they were fleeing violence. At one point, she had 90,000 people on her farm. And so she had to organize to take care of them. It's not just providing medical care. They had to get food and shelter and all the rest of it. And then one day, al-Shabaab militants showed up and demanded that she leave and turn over the farm to them. And she refused. And there were a bunch of teenage boys, basically, holding automatic weapons, telling her to get off her own property. And she stood her ground. It could have gone either way. And she not only said no, she said, "What are you doing? What have you ever done to help anybody?" And she basically shamed them into leaving. And she later was diagnosed with a brain tumor. She had to leave to go get treatment. Thankfully, it was benign. She came back, and it happened again, where a new set of militants showed up. She's still there. She's helped by her two daughters who became doctors. But lots of times people think, like, you know, what would I have done in the civil rights movement or during the Blitz, or you know, at a terrible point of conflict in my own life, or anything that I have heard about or seen. And so I think about her because she was doing incredibly important humanitarian work, and she wouldn't be moved. And it was really an act of grace that they didn't just haul off and kill her, because they saw something in her that really caused them pause, and they went away. So I really, there are a lot of women in this book who faced all kinds of terrible experiences and had to find an enormous amount of resilience and courage to keep going. And we highlight a lot of their stories because they didn't just try to achieve something on behalf of themselves. They wanted to make a positive difference in other people's lives as well. And I think we can all use a big dose of that right now.
I think we can too. Thank you for sharing that inspiration. And this is going to be the first thank you. We're going to do a couple of thank yous. But can I ask you to join me in thanking one gutsy woman, Hillary Clinton?
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Professor Evelyn Welsh, the Provost for Arts and Sciences here at King's College London, and I wear glasses. There. On behalf of Funmi Olanisakin, the Vice President International who introduced you, on behalf of all of the staff, students, council members, and friends of King's College London and the Global Institute for Women's Leadership, we can't say thank you enough, both to you, Secretary Clinton, and to you, Julia Gillard, there. The warmth that you share, the conversation that you've had, both between yourselves but really with us, has been tremendous today. Women's leadership and equality for all, healing divided nations there, is something we care passionately about here at King's College London, because our vision, it sounds like a cliche, but we really mean it. We do want to make the world a better place there. And that's why in 2018 we established the Global Institute for Women's Leadership, superbly led, as you've seen, by Julia Gillard and by Professor Rosie Campbell here. There was a huge sense of excitement, but I was also told to keep quiet about it when we were told that Secretary Clinton was coming to King's there. The event today has far exceeded our expectation and has been a wonderfully thought-provoking and fittingly auspicious start to our new World Questions event series. And the organisation, and everyone knows that this is a team event there. So we really do need to say thank you to the King's Events team, to the Institute for such marvellous organisation. Yeah. Finally, Secretary Clinton, thank you for helping us to shine a light on the importance of women's rights and women's leadership, and above all for your continued commitment to inspiring girls and women, whether they're 4 or 12 or 44 or 64 or 84, there across the world, never to doubt that they are valuable and powerful and deserving of every opportunity to put themselves forward on the route to success. On behalf of all of the gutsy women and their supporters in the room today and beyond, thank you. Please do now join us for a reception in the arcade upstairs. Thank you again.